Welcome to the Week 15 edition of the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson. And let's just get this right out of the way. I missed the playoffs, okay? I'm just going to say it.
That is so sad.
I missed the playoffs by 0.3, correct? 0.3 points?
I think 0.2. I think 0.2.
0.2 to tie. I think there would have been some
that is true.
Some conditions to meet in order for me to break the tie. But yeah, 0.3 points is what I needed that I was just shy of and didn't make the playoffs. It's been a minute since I missed the playoffs, so don't get too used to it, Carson. But you made the playoffs.
Yeah, I missed it last season for the first time in a while, but I obtained the first seed on this last week. I was the third seed for a lot of the time, but I got the first seed. So yeah, things have been going better for me. I'm on a 6-game win streak, and I think Blake is on a 6-game or 5-game lose streak. So my team, some people like Pittman, for example, started doing well for me. It hasn't been like a bunch of good things going my way. It's been fine. And then for Blake, I mean, he's got losing players left and right. Calvin Ridley, Derrick Henry, those are the biggest ones. And then you've done trades. Some have panned out, some haven't, but whatever.
Michael Thomas decided not to play this year. I mean, there's been a variety of things that haven't panned out.
Again, yes, that didn't pan out for you.
Yeah. Either way, let's jump right into this week's football because people are listening for their own teams, not to hear about us talk about ours. So let's get right into it.
Thursday Night Football, Chiefs Chargers.
All right. So I want to start with the obvious elephant in the room, and that's Patrick Mahomes. So he's coming off a game where he scored just over 20 fantasy points, 2 passing touchdowns, 20 yards rushing. Here's what I'm thinking with him. All right, so way back in week 3, before this podcast even started, Patrick Mahomes played the LA Chargers, who is their opponent this week. In that game, he got just over 20 fantasy points, 3 passing touchdowns, 2 turnovers, and 45 yards rushing. So let me ask you this. With how Mahomes has been struggling back and forth, he's been up and down the season. Yeah. How confident are you against this opponent?
I mean, statistically, the Chargers are much easier to rush against than pass against. But it's a divisional matchup. The Chiefs, kind of have turned it around a bit and are in a good spot to potentially secure the first seed in the AFC if they just keep on playing well. It's a divisional matchup, so they need to get these wins to secure winning the division. I do think that he's going to show up in this matchup, although the days of him being drafted in like the 3rd round are far gone, and I think they always should be because, as we talked about before, you'll find quarterbacks later on that will give you a lot of value and might average like a point or 2 less than Mahomes or whoever the premier quarterback is, but it's still worthwhile. I do think, though, that he's going to be all right. I don't think he's not going to show up in a divisional matchup late in the season where they need to secure their playoff spot.
Okay. So I think we can agree that he's not a lineup lock. Like, he's not a set it and forget it, just,
Yeah.
I think there are some options out there that you may be considering. It's difficult, though, because it's the first round of the playoffs. But I'm going to give you a name game, and the way that this works is I'm going to say a name, a different backup quarterback in the league that you may have or may be available on waivers, and you're just going to say that player's name or Patrick Mahomes versus who you like the best.
Oh, God.
You ready?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, first off, I think this is the one that's the most relevant for a lot of people. Taysom Hill at Tampa Bay.
Do I just need to say the name, or can I explain myself?
Yeah. No. Let's do like first impressions, quick responses.
I think Patrick.
Okay, Kirk Cousins at Chicago Monday night.
Kirk.
Joe Burrow at Denver.
Patrick.
Carson Wentz versus New England.
Patrick.
Derek Carr at Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm going Patrick for. Yeah, I'm going Patrick probably for the rest of these, honestly, but you keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that's probably most enticing after Kirk Cousins and Taysom Hill. Kirk Cousins should be rostered in your leagues by now, but if he isn't, he's a good option according to Carson, and I kind of like that too. The last one I'll say, Tua Tagovailoa versus the Jets.
Actually, yeah. Oh, God. That'd be so bold, but that's a great matchup that we'll talk about later. I wouldn't fault you if you put Tua. That is true. That is crazy, though.
Okay. So, I mean, but right, this is the idea that this is Patrick Mahomes, who was, arguably taken first or second overall at the position. And we're talking about guys like Kirk Cousins and Tua Tagovailoa replacing him in the first week of the playoffs. So it is something to note. Like you said, the Chiefs, or that the Chargers rather, are a tough pass defense, but this offense runs through Mahomes, so it's kind of hard not to see him getting involved.
Who in that list would you pick over Mahomes?
I think I would go with. I'd probably go with Taysom Hill. He's just been too consistent in his, granted his limited number of starts, but like 17.5 fantasy points in every start so far in his career.
I would just be nervous in divisional matchup against the Buccaneers.
I get that. But New Orleans has owned Tampa Bay since Brady got there.
Yeah.
In regular season, at least. I would not go Kirk Cousins. I'd stick with Mahomes.
Oh.
And probably anyone else on this list. I'm going to stick with Mahomes for most of these. So,
yeah. But the fact we're talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And we've spent a good amount of time talking about the Chiefs. Let's move on to the Chargers.
Yeah.
So, Kansas City's defense, man, they've been looking like they're ready for a playoffs push. Am I right?
Yeah, they have. It's what was letting them to do nothing in the first half of the season because the Chiefs' offense wasn't doing phenomenal and the defense wasn't helping them, so they weren't winning games that they should have been.
They've certainly turned things around. They've allowed 9 points or fewer in 5 of their last games.
Wow.
Like I said, way back in week 3, the Chargers put up 30 on them, but that was when Kansas City's defense was kind of struggling. So I think they're kind of figuring things out. They're in a rhythm. They're playing strong defense. That being said, we do need to mention, because we talked about it pre-show, the Chiefs are going to be without a few defensive pieces. Chris Jones and other players in the secondary, just due to illness and a variety of different reasons. But it's not going to be the Chiefs defense that you saw last week. There are going to be some missing pieces, so that is important to note. Brandon Staley expects to have Keenan Allen back in the lineup, barring any setbacks. He has been activated off the COVID list, so he should be all clear there. Austin Eckler, he's going to be a game-time decision for Thursday Night Football. Now, the good thing about this is that it's Thursday night. The bad thing about this is that it's Thursday night, meaning he's not going to have extra time to get well. The game is today as of listening to this podcast. So it's the good thing is that you will be able to pivot. You won't have to wait. If it's like a Monday night, you'd have to risk rolling the dice on him being healthy in a game time decision scenario. So you do have that, but obviously a major loss if you are without Austin Eckler this week.
Yeah, I will say, don't get cute. If he's active, you're going to start him. I mean, just imagine if you had Cook last week and decided to get cute, and you see how that happened for Dalvin Cook. So first week of the playoffs, if Eckler's active, you got to just trust that he's actually active and will have enough of a workload to be startable.
Yeah, in the event that Eckler is unavailable, is there a running back in this backfield that you feel comfortable starting?
I don't think there's like a de facto guy. I mean, don't they kind of bounce around between Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly? I mean, I don't think there's like a clear one between them two.
Yeah, even Roundtree, the rookie, I think he's a rookie.
I would look elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. Not to say, I mean, the Chiefs have been playing really good defense, so it does kind of make sense that you wouldn't necessarily be confident starting one of those backup guys. Probably better off looking elsewhere if Eckler's unavailable. What's your confidence level in Mike Williams, who last week, without the main guy, Keenan Allen, being there, he got you 6 catches for 61 yards, 12.1 fantasy points?
I'm not very confident in him. I feel like you got to have safer options, and Although he could boom on your bench, and that would suck in playoffs, I don't think you can afford to let him just do like low single digits. He didn't boom without Keenan, and like you were saying, this Chiefs defense, although missing some players, they're looking good. So I wouldn't assume that he'd just return what he did against them in Week 3, because I think he did have a really good week that week.
Yeah, I would argue that it depends on your situation. You know, if you're the low seed in your matchup and you need to kind of make up points somewhere against a more talented opponent based on how their team has performed. You know, they got to the first seed for a reason. So if you just squeaked into the playoffs and you need some upside, Mike Williams, I think he could definitely do well for you. And as we saw back last time they played, Mike Williams did have a good day. But that was a while ago. So, Let's move on to Saturday football. Unless you have something to add?
No, I agree. I think if you feel like you're the underdog, he'd be a good play. But if not, I wouldn't risk it.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so first matchup on Saturday, Raiders against the Browns. The Raiders, man. They got absolutely blown out by Kansas City last week. 5 turnovers, 4 fumbles, and 1 interception. They put up 9 points, but the star of the show was Hunter Renfrow. 13 catches, 117 receiving yards, 1 touchdown, finished with 28.7 fantasy points. He's got double-digit targets in back-to-back weeks. Where do you expect Renfrow's ADP to be next season?
I still think that he's going to get overlooked. I mean, I always bring up Deontay Johnson. He's that reception monster that, booms when he gets the touchdown, just like Renfrow did in this game. And maybe next season, Deontay Johnson will be valued like a low-end low-end wide receiver 1. But this year, he was my 3rd wide receiver off the draft board. So I expect Hunter Renfrow to not be any higher than that. And I think that he is a solid wide receiver 2 that I still think is going to be overlooked, and that you could probably get him as your 3rd wide receiver, and I'd be very happy to have him as that.
So he's currently position ranked 12. Just to put that in perspective, Hunter Renfrow is.
Yeah.
I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be taken inside the top 15 at wide receiver.
Yeah. As he should.
Top 20. Yeah, but he definitely belongs there. He's just been fantastic in this offense that really hasn't had a lot of bright spots this season.
Yeah.
Also on that note, Darren Waller with a knee injury did not practice on Wednesday. That's a player that a lot of people could really use in their fantasy playoffs, and Derek Carr could use under their weapon in the passing game because, Renfro's getting it done, but in terms of that NFL offense, they need more than just him to get some points on the board.
Yeah, he's talented, but there's certainly a reason that he's getting 13 receptions, and it's because of just lack of other options, really.
Yeah, maybe so. On to the Browns. Kareem Hunt with his ankle injury, he is considered week to week. Head coach Kevin Stefanski said Hunt is unlikely to make it this week. So I'm kind of bearing the lead. They're going to be without their quarterback, most likely. Baker Mayfield tested positive for COVID, and in addition to that, Jarvis Landry and Austin Hooper also tested positive. So Donovan Peoples-Jones, last week he got 5 catches for 90 yards. Is he worthy of a waiver pickup, rostered in 9.1% of leagues?
I think he could be rostered in leagues where you feel like your last wide receiver will never see your lineup. I don't think Peoples-Jones should see your lineup this week necessarily, just because this is like his first week that he hasn't just been 2 receptions for 80 yards and a touchdown. He actually got a handful of receptions and still a high receiving yard total. But I would, if you feel like your last wide receiver is never going to see your team, take a shot on Peoples-Jones and see if he has another week like that, and then maybe you could feel more comfortable starting him next week. I wouldn't this week, though, personally, especially without Baker Mayfield and all the stuff that the Browns are going to be without.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and maybe he's a more of a DFS look than a fantasy option, but something to note, something worth noting. All right, let's talk about Patriots at the Colts for Saturday Night Football. So right off the bat, the Colts play in a dome. No weather concerns this week. So we're gonna see the Patriots offense at full tempo compared to what we saw last Monday night, or 2 Monday nights technically. Indianapolis ranks middle of the road in all defensive categories, so you're not really, it's not really a plus or a minus for any of their skilled players. It is important to note that Damian Harris, with his hamstring injury, was a limited practice participant on Tuesday and Wednesday. If he misses, Ramondre Stevenson could see another big workload. And, outside of that, I think Jakobi Meyers is probably still the top option, or do you like Kendrick Bourne more?
I was wanting to ask you the question. As the Patriots fan, I picked up Kendrick Bourne last night off the waivers. I'm seeking your advice between Myers and Bourne as a better flex play. Currently, I have Bourne, but what are you thinking on that?
Well, I think you have to lean Bourne just based on the touchdown upside.
Yeah.
I'm
the past 5 weeks, the receptions are not that different. I think Bourne might actually have more, and then he's also getting the touchdowns.
So I've got Bourne pulled up right now. He's got we're ignoring week 13. Week 9, 3 catches, 4 catches, 4 catches, 5 catches. So, and then kind of mid to high 50 or above in receiving yards, and he has 3 touchdowns in those 4 games. So that's good for upside purposes. I think it's got to be Bourne, just based on that alone.
Yeah, all right. We'll see.
Yeah. And then let's talk about the Colts. Right off the bat, we talked about it going into the Bills game with the Patriots. Lower expectations for Carson Wentz and the pass catchers because New England has one of the best defenses in the league. Since week 7, New England has allowed one team to score over 13 points, and that was the LA Chargers in week 8.
Wow.
New England ranks first in points allowed per game, third in passing yards allowed per game, and total yards allowed per game. The question on everyone's mind is going to be, can they slow down Jonathan Taylor? Because they're not going to shut him down. Listen, I give all due respect and all credit to Bill Belichick about isolating an opposing team's star player and game planning around keeping them hamstring, just like preventing them from doing really well. But Jonathan Taylor is on a tear. He has rushed for over 100 yards 7 times this season, including 4 of his last 5 games. So, in terms of the other aspects of the offense with the pass catchers, I would be worried about Michael Pittman, and I know that you roster him. So, what are your expectations for him?
I can't bench him. That's how I feel with him. Again, this is not a great matchup, but I feel like he'll do well enough considering he's top of the depth chart for wide receivers, and unless they pull a week 13 Patriots, they have to pass the ball, so it's got to go to him, I would think. I do think I don't know, it'll be interesting. This will be a good test for the Patriots defense, and
there is a rumor. I definitely don't agree with that. I think the challenge is going to be slowing down Jonathan Taylor, but outside of that, I'm not really too concerned by the pass catchers on this offense. There's a rumor going around that J.C. Jackson may be shadowing Pittman, which is worse news for you. Just a heads up there. But
can I bench him? No, I can't bench him.
It depends on your situation. You certainly, like I said, you got to lower expectations, and I think that's where we can move on with that.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor will be a big test for this defense, and it'll be interesting to see what they can do against him.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Sunday matchups. Tennessee Titans against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, Pittsburgh ranks 30th in rushing yards allowed per game. You like that for the backfield. And 27th in total yards allowed. So, Dante Foreman, 13 carries for 47 yards and a touchdown, 2 catches for 15 yards, got you 14.2 fantasy points. This is a good matchup, and I think Foreman is flex worthy. I don't think he's an RB2, but I think you can flex him with some pretty good confidence in this matchup.
I agree. I feel pretty good about him. I'm starting him. The Steelers' rush defense looks almost like the worst in the league in the past 2 weeks. I mean, week 13, they made Devonta Freeman look like he was in his prime. He's had a few good games recently, but he looked really good in that game. And then they allowed Dalvin Cook to have 200-plus rushing yards. So I don't expect Foreman to do that, but I think there'll be enough for him to have a good day.
Yeah, I agree with that. In terms of pass catchers, I don't think there's anyone that you can start on this roster until A.J. Brown comes back next week. Jeff Swaim and Anthony Ferkser led the team in receiving yards last week, and you may be thinking, you may be thinking, maybe Julio was out. No, he played. He got 4 catches for 33 yards. So I don't think you can start him when he can't get over 10 against the Jaguars.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really need to pass. They seemed to be in control that entire game, and their first drive, I think Foreman scored, so they had an early lead. But again, I agree. You can't expect him to just do better than that, even in a matchup that, I mean, you can't get a better matchup. You can maybe get a better game script, but no, I don't trust it.
Yeah, it's not his year, and I don't know. I think he's going to fall in drafts next year considerably after what he's done this year.
Agreed.
All right, let's talk about the other side of the matchup. The Steelers. Tennessee ranks 22nd in passing yards allowed per game and 2nd in rushing yards allowed per game. So that kind of scares you for Najee Harris, although we have seen him be heavily involved in the passing game. Take, for instance, the Cincinnati game where he had 14 catches. So we have seen that Pittsburgh can rely on him not only on the ground but also through the air. So I think lower expectations for Najee from a runner's perspective, but if they decide to get him involved in dump-offs, I think he's going to do just fine.
Yep.
And then lastly, you're starting Deontay Johnson. You're starting Chase Claypool. I think at this point there's not going to be any disciplinary action taken against him based on his behavior on and off the field the last few weeks. But I don't think there's really anyone besides those two guys that you feel good about starting. I mean, where do you stand on Freiermuth right now?
I think he only had 2 receptions. One of them was a touchdown. But no, I don't think he can be super confident. I think that Chase Claypool got 3 receptions on the last drive, which helped his day. But again, I think he had 8 receptions. You can't just hedge your bets and say no and not start him. So yeah, I agree that you're worth starting him. And then you already know what I think about Deontay. So right. I agree.
Okay. That means he likes him.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about Panthers Bills. This should be kind of a defensive matchup, I think. Buffalo ranks 1st in total yards allowed, 2nd in passing yards allowed, and 3rd in points allowed. So, man, if Cam Newton's the starter, last week we saw he did less than 200 passing yards, no passing touchdowns, but he did have 10 rushes for 47 yards and a touchdown, also had a fumble. He got you 13.82 fantasy points. Cam, remember when he started and he said to the camera, "I'm back, I'm back."
Yeah.
I don't think so. Cam needs to prove himself before you can confidently start him.
Maybe
especially against such a tough matchup.
Maybe he just meant Patriots Cam.
Very much so, because that's who he's been looking like. He's got a rushing touchdown in 4 straight games. It's just like you said, when he was at New England, his passing game leaves a lot to be desired. Chuba Hubbard, 0 targets last week. He got 10 rushes for 33 yards and a touchdown. I mean, with Cam as the quarterback and how he is as a quarterback, it really limits Hubbard's upside in PPR formats. I don't feel comfortable starting him this week against the Bills.
Yeah, and this is unique because when Hubbard had the backfield kind of to himself when McCaffrey was out early in the season, Newton wasn't there. So I agree. just watching highlights and see Newton running in for like 15 yards or whatever, and it's like, oh, yeah, that could have been Hubbard points, but they're all going to be taken away. So, yeah, you can't be confident in him, and then the matchup isn't good either. But
Yeah, and it totally makes sense that Cam continues to get rushing touchdowns because, I mean, he's a very physically imposing guy.
yeah,
So on the goal line, what are you going to give it to the guy that's like half a foot shorter than him almost? Or are you going to give it to the guy that's 6'5", 240, and, like, you know, he's going to make a play because he always has in his career? Yeah, I think Hubbard's got very limited upside as long as Newton is there, and especially in this matchup. On a different note, we finally saw a Robbie Anderson game. 7 catches, 84 yards, and a touchdown. He got you 21.4 fantasy points last week. Season highs in catches, targets, and yards. And then it is important to note, DJ Moore was a limited practice participant with a hamstring injury on Wednesday. So let's go both scenarios. If DJ Moore misses, how do you rank Robbie Anderson? And then if DJ Moore plays, how do you rank Robbie?
I think if DJ Moore misses, I think you can play Anderson if you don't have better options.
If you're desperate?
Yeah, basically. If DJ Moore is playing in the fantasy playoffs, I mean, we see plenty of wide receivers have games like this and then have one reception the next game. So DJ Moore's playing, I don't trust it in this matchup where extremely hard to pass against the Bills, and Robbie Anderson could just disappear, especially if Moore is there, if they just end up forcing it to Moore because they're not having a lot of success, and that's all they can do. So no, I wouldn't trust Anderson if Moore was there, but if he's not, I mean, they got to throw to somebody, but I still wouldn't feel great about it.
Yeah, until Cam calls his own number and just, scrambles. So
yeah,
I agree with that. It's a tough matchup, and you need to see it more from Robbie before you can trust him, I think, especially in the playoffs. All right, let's talk about Bills. Carolina ranks first in passing yards allowed per game, second in total yards allowed, and 8th in points allowed. Josh Allen pretty much put the entire Bills franchise on his back last week. 54 pass attempts, 308 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then 12 carries for 109 yards and another touchdown. He was spotted in a walking boot after the Week 14 loss. Monitor his availability. He was a limited practice participant on Wednesday. And Mitchell Trubisky is the backup. So it really changes the outlook of this team if Mitch Trubisky is leading the way. But let's go off the assumption that Allen is playing. Emmanuel Sanders has a knee sprain. He will likely miss this week. So I'm going to ask you, you're not really worried about Stephon Diggs. He's going to find a way.
Yeah.
And Cole Beasley has been better as of late. But who I want to ask you about is Gabriel Davis, rostered in 2.5% of leagues. He got 5 catches for 43 yards and a touchdown, 8 targets in Week 14, a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. Is he worthy of a waiver pick?
Not really, in my opinion. I mean, you know how I value wide receivers. Like we talked about Donovan Peoples-Jones earlier. I feel like he has a little bit more value because he had a good game, 5 receptions, 90 yards. Gabriel Davis, not a bad game, obviously. He had 15.3 points, but back-to-back weeks where the touchdown is the only reason he has double-digit points. So I wouldn't be super confident. I think that there's too many mouths to feed in this offense and that he's just completely touchdown dependent, and you can't depend on that with wanting to start him. Or again, like I've always said, if you just have someone that you're not very active on the waiver, so your last wide receiver just is a bum, then sure. But I think in most instances I wouldn't feel super confident yet.
Yeah, maybe someone to add and stash in case you need him moving forward.
Yeah, potentially.
All right, let's talk about a division matchup. Washington against the Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia ranks middle of the road in all defensive categories, so, no upgrades, no downgrades. Taylor Heinicke left early with a knee injury in Week 14. The MRI did not reveal anything significant. He is expected to start, so you like that for this offense. something you don't like for this offense, Terry McLaurin is in the concussion protocol. So we're going to be monitoring his status. Are there any pass catchers that interest you if McLaurin misses?
I mean, not really. Ricky Seals-Jones didn't have a good week this past week with Logan Thomas being out, but we've seen him have success. Prior in the season, Logan Thomas has been out, but I mean, I know they've like Curtis Samuel, but I don't even know if he's injured. He's been injured on and off all the time.
He's been really, like, they have not found a way to integrate him in this offense.
No, I don't think he could be. I couldn't even name another guy with confidence that I'm getting their name right as far as pass catchers on this team. So.
Yeah, the guy last week that had a pretty big game was Cam Sims, and he got placed on the COVID list earlier. Okay. So
no,
he's likely not available. But I'm going to go back on what you said with Ricky Seals-Jones. I think if you need a tight end this week, maybe you're down Darren Waller again or Austin Hooper, if that's the case. But those are kind of two that just came off the top of my head. But either way, the Eagles ranked last against tight ends, so if McLaurin misses, especially, I kind of feel like Seals-Jones could eat this week. So even if McLaurin plays, I still feel good about rolling out Seals-Jones this week because the Eagles have just proven all season long that tight ends can get points on them.
I agree.
All right, on the Eagles side, the Washington football team ranks 30th in passing yards allowed. That would be great if the Eagles had a throwing quarterback. 23rd in points allowed and 5th in rushing yards allowed. Jalen Hurts, like I alluded, under 200 passing yards in 5 straight games. Double-digit rushes in 5 of his last 7 games. 55-plus rushing yards in 6 straight games. And here's the most important thing. He split first-team reps with Minshew in practice. He's not fully healthy.
Yeah, I mean, you know how much I like Jalen Hurts. And that's not very this time. I don't like him very much at all. I'd almost feel more confident in Minshew in this matchup because they're much easier to pass against than run against. I don't think you can... I mean, you'll go on to talk about more players. I don't think you can confidently start anyone on this roster, especially if Hurts is having injury issues. I mean, he's a hard one to bench just because of that rushing floor, but no, I don't feel confident with any of these guys.
Yeah, I would say that if Hurts plays, you're probably not going to want any of his pass catchers just because they haven't been... I mean, Jalen Hurts is kind of an independently viable fantasy option in this offense.
He kind of just does his own thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I agree with you there. On the note of the pass catchers, like Devonta Smith, he's a single-digit scorer in back-to-back games, 2 catches in back-to-back games. So you don't like that. And then Dallas Goedert, he is a single-digit scorer in 3 of his last 5 games. Important to note that when Minshew got the start, that was Dallas Goedert's season high, where he had 2 receiving touchdowns, over 100 receiving yards. He was heavily relied on, one of Minshew's safety valves. But yeah, we'll need to monitor that injury status heading into the weekend. And then in terms of running backs, it's a tough matchup. I would avoid all of them if possible because Jordan Howard recently returned to practice. So just another running back in the mix. It's not a desirable scenario there.
Not at all. Definition of a committee.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a real stinker of a matchup here. Texans against the Jaguars. All right, let's start with Brandon Cooks. 11 targets, 8 catches for 101 yards. He got you 18.1 fantasy points. This was the first time he got 10 or more targets since week 9, so you like to see that. On the other side of the receiving game, Nico Collins, 5 catches for 69 yards. He got you 11.9 fantasy points, 10 targets for Seattle last week, rostered in 1.2% of leagues. Is he worth a waiver pickup?
No. I mean, we can't even see Brandon Cooks.
You're crapping on all my waiver guys.
I'm just saying, like... I mean, we're kind of grasping at straws. It's week 15. I mean, I applaud you for finding these sneaky pickups, but Brandon Cooks being the sole option in this offense where game script should always be in his favor, sometimes has games where he does nothing. So, no, I can't be confident in anyone else just yet.
I understand. No, I get it. And these are definitely like deep league considerations because
yeah, I mean for sure. I mean, it all depends on your league, your lineup. Some of these people might be worth rostering and giving them a shot, but I'm just saying in a general sense, I don't trust it.
Okay, that's completely fair. We are talking about unproven assets. I mean, they would be rostered more if they were.
Yes.
Let's talk about the Jaguars, who have a lot of proven assets that aren't being utilized correctly. You'd like to be able to trust the likes of James Robinson, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, but Urban Meyer is just he's just running. He's running things his way, and it's not going well. Jacksonville may have a better record than Detroit, but I would argue that this is the most dysfunctional team in the NFL right now.
Yeah, 100%. And I hear that the owner is leaning towards keeping Meyer for another season. I can't imagine. Apparently, he's just denying all the reports of a plethora of things that have happened. I read something today that Josh Lambo, the kicker that used to be on their team, claimed that Urban Meyer kicked him during a practice one time. And just would say stuff like, how are you not making these kicks? Just stupid stuff for a coach that should be a lot more composed than acting like a toddler. I don't like him at all. I hate him, actually. I'll go that far. Mismanaging his entire team. You might want to talk about this, but can you even confidently start James Robinson with how dysfunctional this team is? And that sounds absurd.
It does. It's not a good situation. You don't feel good starting James Robinson this week like you should against the Texans defense. You may not have better options. You certainly don't have a lot of options with more upside than Robinson if he gets the work. But it is a question, and it's not an enviable position to be in.
Not at all.
Yeah. So let's move on to Cowboys-Giants. This will be my last game before Carson takes over hosting duties. So, Cowboys. Giants rank 25th in rushing yards allowed and 26th in total yards allowed. So, presumably, if Zeke is healthy, and he was a full participant at practice on Wednesday, should be a good matchup for him. On the other hand, Dak Prescott has been stinky. Back-to-back disappointing weeks. He's got one game with more than 20 rushing yards, and previously in his career, that was something that you could count on from Dak. I think that ankle injury, was that last year?
Yeah,
I think it was last year.
Season.
Yeah, I think that ankle injury has had some psychological side effects. He just doesn't seem to be running the ball like he used to. And the last time that he had a rushing game of over 20 yards was back in Week 4 against Carolina. And he didn't get a lot either, 35 in that game. So we can do kind of an abbreviated name game, but it's kind of the same cast of characters. So Dak Prescott or Taysom Hill?
Taysom.
Dak Prescott or Kirk Cousins?
Kirk.
Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow?
Joe.
Dak Prescott or Carson Wentz?
I would have to trust Dak in this matchup being much more favorable than Carson Wentz's matchup.
I agree with you there. Dak Prescott or Taylor Heineke?
I don't think I could bench him for Heineke. I mean, Heineke probably has a higher floor right now, but his ceiling is not much higher than that, I feel.
Yeah. All right, last one. Dak Prescott or Tua Tagovailoa versus the Jets?
I mean, we're going to get to Tua later, I guess, but I really do like that matchup, and you can say the same against Dak, but man, I don't think I could bring myself to do that in the playoffs. And I feel the same with Mahomes. I don't think I could actually realistically do that, but if you tell me that Tua scores higher than both of them this week, I wouldn't be appalled.
Well, at some point, like we talked about with Saquon, you gotta forget the player's name and look at what they've been doing.
It is true, and it's not like Tua's been on fire, but that is a pretty fire matchup for him.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, Dak Prescott in a different league where playoffs started sooner, Dak Prescott completely tanked my team. So
yeah.
I mean, I totally understand. I've picked up Taysom Hill in that league, and I don't even think it matters anymore. But
I'm hearing a lot of analysts saying that he's the only thing really holding them back from being a Super Bowl, from them being a Super Bowl team.
The defense has certainly picked up.
Yeah, I mean, that rookie, Micah Parsons, people are talking about him being Defensive Rookie of the Year. Not Defensive Rookie of the Year, just Defensive Player of the Year as well.
He's been something special for them. That's very cool to see.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about Zeke for a minute. Like we said, full participant at practice, but he is a single-digit scorer in his last 2 games. Couldn't get over 10 fantasy points at the Washington football team when Pollard was inactive. Also to note that Pollard did not practice on Wednesday. Zeke got you 9 points last week, and he's been a single digit in the last 2. So how are you feeling about him going up against the Giants this week?
I like the matchup better. I mean, Washington is becoming a very difficult run defense to go against. I think they were 3rd, at least last week they were. And I think Corey Clement out-carried Zeke in this game, and Zeke was wearing a knee brace. But Zeke had like 7.4 points or something like that when I checked halfway through the second quarter, so I don't know what happened. I think just the Cowboys' defense allowed them just to win the game right there with all the stuff they were doing. But no, I can't bench Zeke in the favorable matchup where he's, at the very least, is going to get a goal line touchdown, you would hope. And he's got too much touchdown upside at running back, which is kind of hard to find for me to just bench him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Just important to note that, I mean, you're not really going to have better options on the waivers to replace Zeke in a matchup like this.
No.
But he has been struggling. On the pass catchers side, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, these are all starters. I would argue flex for Gallup, but they've all been reliable, solid wide receivers. Dalton Schultz, on the other hand...
I'm so sorry. He's the reason you lost, honestly.
Let's not get into that. But Dalton Schultz had 1 catch for 4 yards. He's a single-digit scorer in 5 of his last 7 games. He's just not getting the receiving volume that we came to expect prior to the Week 7 bye. And I think that has a lot to do with Michael Gallup returning.
Yeah, you can't trust him. There's too many mouths to feed.
Yeah, he was kind of filling the void when Gallup was out, and now that he's back, Schultz has significantly fallen off, and I think there are better options at tight end for you to find or use.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, let's talk about the Giants on the other side of this matchup. The numbers don't really do it justice, but Dallas ranks 23rd in passing yards allowed, total yards allowed, and 11th in points allowed. So that one I believe, at least as of late. So Mike Glennon is expected to remain the starter while Daniel Jones recovers. Saquon Barkley, 16 carries for 64 yards and 3 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown. He got you 18.5 fantasy points. You're happy with that if you started him. It's a season high in rushing yards. That alone, that's an interesting statistic.
At
64 yards?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Tied his season high in carries at 16. I mean, he's a dual threat receiving and running back. So that one doesn't really surprise me too much. I think he gets involved in the passing game enough where 16 is not a crazy number for him. But what's your confidence level in Saquon this week against a kind of middle-of-the-road run defense, but a in-form defense nonetheless?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were a little bit more negative on him last week, but it was good to see him get 18.5 points this week. I mean, obviously a touchdown helped with that, but I mean, he got involved in the passing game. He's getting 16 carries. He's just been inefficient. I think he's at the very least a flex.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's where he belongs, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, a round 1 pick in most fantasy drafts this season.
Yeah, if not like on the turn of the second round.
Yeah.
So let's talk about these Giants pass catchers, and they're always all season long they've been hurt, but couple guys that were active last week, Sterling Shepard and Kenny Golladay, they combined for 42 yards and 4 catches.
It's pretty bad.
So, yeah, that's real bad. Kyle Rudolph led the team in receiving yards. He had 66, and the majority of his yards came on one play. 60-yard catch. He had 2 catches on the day. Assuming all of these guys are healthy, we're talking about Kadarius Toney and Darius Slayton and all these other guys, Evan Ingram. Are there any New York Giants pass catcher that you're willing to start?
No.
Yeah, I think that's the right call, honestly.
Yeah.
Especially with Mike Glennon out there. I mean, you feel a little bit better with Daniel Jones, but with Glennon there, I just, we just haven't seen it. We just haven't seen it from these guys.
I mean, yeah, and all those names, they probably had higher hopes for Kenny Golladay in this offense coming from the Lions, but it turns out all these wide receivers are kind of the same tier, so it's too many mouths to feed, and they're all like...
Yeah, nobody's really stepping up.
And they're all like flex plays at best, so it'd be really difficult to pinpoint who's going to do the best out of all of them, especially if they're all healthy.
I think that's completely fair.
All right, we can move on to the matchups I'll be talking about. Cardinals, Lions. I wanted the Cardinals to beat the Rams. I just like them more, but I will say, fantasy-wise, this makes the division more interesting and makes the Cardinals have to keep on going full force and maybe throughout the rest of the season if they want to secure the first seed of the NFC or even just to win their division. Kyler Murray, 32 for 49. He had 383 passing yards, so that's great in comparison to Week 13, but 0 passing touchdowns and 2 interceptions. 7 rushes for 61 yards was good to see, too. Seeing him get a lot of rushing yards keeps his floor up. He didn't have an amazing day, 17.42 fantasy points, but obviously you feel great about him against the Lions. James Conner, monitor his injury status. I think he picked up an ankle injury. He had 13 receptions for 31 yards and 2 touchdowns. It'd be like, oh, okay, so goal line chow hounds, but he had 9 receptions. What'd I say?
Receptions.
Oh, 13 receptions.
13
he almost rushes. Did. He almost did. 9 receptions. I got ahead of myself. He almost played like a wide receiver. He was all over the place with how they were using him.
Did you see his one-hand catch?
Yeah, I did.
Over the middle?
And he had it in Week 13 for a touchdown, too. So he's got hands. 33.5 fantasy points. But hold your horses, because Chase Edmonds did not play in Week 14, but he's expected to play this week and monitors injury status. He'd been out with an ankle injury for multiple weeks, but this is the thing I want to bring to your attention. Connor averaged roughly 11.5 fantasy points, and a lot of those points were just due to the goal line touchdown rushes in weeks 1 through 8 when Edmonds was active. But he's averaged 25.84 fantasy points in weeks 9 through 14. So I'll just ask you, what do you make of this backfield, specifically, I guess, for Connor, but for the both of them when Edmonds comes back?
Well, I'll start with this matchup in particular, and I think that, given what the likely game script will be, I think it's going to be another James Conner day, assuming that he's healthy enough, of course.
Yeah.
I also think, so Connor was a free agent acquisition in the offseason, and it seemed like they didn't really utilize him much outside of goal line work. I think with the way that he's performed these past weeks, and you mentioned it with how he's been averaging, 25 plus fantasy points, I think he's going to be more involved in this offense even when Edmonds is healthy and back in the game. It really does come down to game script and how the Cardinals are, either they're controlling the game, and I think it's going to be more Connor. If they're playing catch-up, I think it's going to be more Edmonds. The reality is that Connor will not be the player that he has been in Edmonds' absence when Edmonds is back, but I think it'll be better than the start of the season.
I mean, Connor could be a potential... he could be on a lot of teams that make the playoffs just because of where he was drafted and how he's been performing in the past 5 weeks. But, I mean, we saw, and we'll talk about them later, we saw Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon both get it done against the Lions last week, but it'll be interesting to see how this offense uses both of them. DeAndre Hopkins... Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I think this is a Connor game even if Edmonds is healthy.
I agree. I mean, it's hard to deny his production. I mean, he's looking like 2018 or whatever year it was that he was amazing for the Steelers.
Yeah.
He's looking phenomenal. Yeah, so DeAndre Hopkins, news as of today on Wednesday, expected to miss the rest of the regular season with a sprained knee. I guess it's not surprising they're being cautious with him because there's no doubt that the Cardinals are making the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, mathematically, I guess it's not impossible, but there's no doubt they're not going to make the playoffs. But benching Hopkins is probably the smart move to keep him healthy for the playoffs. But Christian Kirk, 3 receptions for 86 yards. AJ Green, someone that was on Brev's bench, unfortunately, 7 receptions for 102 yards.
Okay.
And,
you keep taking shots at me.
So I do want to ask you, among Christian Kirk, AJ Green, even Rondale Moore, because he had value in the beginning of the season, and Zach Ertz, who do you feel the most confident in during Hopkins' absence? And I guess you could say multiple, or how do you assess those 4, I guess?
Well, I would say the ranking is probably more often than not Kirk, Green, Ertz, and Rondale Moore at number 4. So I remember in the beginning of the season when we talked about how if you're starting a Cardinals pass catcher, you either have to just set it and forget it and live with the consequences, or always bench them because you're never going to be able to justify when one of them goes off in any particular matchup. So we're kind of in that position again, and there really wasn't anyone that stepped up in Hopkins' absence earlier this season either. So
Yeah,
I think that I mean you can rank them, but I think that honestly it's anyone's guess who gets the work week to week. So it's not an ideal scenario.
Yeah, I mean, even Hopkins was becoming touchdown dependent, so that just shows how many mouths are a feed. He wasn't even reliable on a week-to-week basis like he has been historically.
Yeah, he was heavily targeted against the Rams, which was good to see. But now he's gone for the rest of the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, and it's interesting though because I mean, you will say you go based off earlier this season when Hopkins was out, but when Hopkins was out, Kyler was out, so it's kind of a different scenario too. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, but it's a good matchup if you are wanting to start one of them and you're confident enough in that, which I would say would be hard to do. But Lions defense ranks 28th in total yards allowed per game and 29th in NFL points allowed per game, so certainly a good matchup, and I expect the Cardinals to bounce back in a game that they need to keep on winning to secure their a high spot in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. We can move on to the Lions. DeAndre Swift injured. He didn't play for the past 2 weeks, I believe. He's been injured since early on in the Thanksgiving matchup. Monitor his injury status with a shoulder injury. He did not practice today as of recording on Wednesday, so I guess you just have to watch that out. There are rumors that the Lions are shutting him down for the rest of the season, so that would really be unfortunate for people that have Swift. Jamal Williams. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say, I think that if they choose to do that, I think it's the right choice for Swift because
it doesn't make any sense.
What are the Lions going to accomplish if Swift is out there? They're going to get more wins and get a worse draft pick next year. Like they need picks and they have a reliable talent in DeAndre Swift that get him healthy in the offseason, get him back ready for week 1 of 2022. And hopefully win some more games. I think that's what this franchise needs to do. Not that they're consulting me, but I think that's likely what's going to happen.
I think they should, because all the reasons you brought forward, there's no reason for them to risk him making his injury more severe or just picking up any other injuries. Doesn't make any sense. He's been the bright light this season for this team, the only real star for this entire season. Jamal Williams was on the COVID list. I mean, you like his outlook if Swift is out and they shut him down, especially because then they kind of just have to lock in and go with Williams. But he hasn't been an amazing replacement in the game Swift has been out, but certainly worth rostering. So I guess you just have to see what happens with Swift before you assess Williams. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, 8 receptions for 73 yards. He's got 12 targets in back-to-back games. I don't know his roster percentage, but it's certainly below 50%. So St. Brown's a no-brainer. Add off the waivers, don't you think?
I will agree with that. So he is 16.1% rostered.
Yeah, well below 50
right now. Yeah, and I asked you this, I think, the past 2 weeks about him. So
Yeah.
I've been keeping my eye on him. But yeah, St. Brown, he seems to be emerging as the lead pass catcher in this offense, and it is important to note T.J. Hawkinson missed last week, but even still, I think it's time that we're in week 5. We're moving into week 15. It's about time that we figured out that there's a Lions pass catcher worth anything on this roster.
Because the game script's always in their favor. I mean, that's why Swift was such a elite RB1, because he would just get dump-off passes, and now they have a guy that is getting these targets.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe it is a response to Swift's absence that a pass catcher is getting more looks, but I think those are kind of different targets usually. So
yeah,
I am kind of believing in St. Brown emerging in this offense. The trouble is about, how confident can you feel about starting a Lions pass catcher in the fantasy playoffs?
In the fantasy playoffs, I don't think you can be super confident. Yeah, if he has another double-digit target game, it might be a different story.
I'll agree. Yeah, I'll agree with you that he's worth adding. Like I've mentioned guys earlier in the show, but not necessarily someone that you're rushing to start this week.
Yeah, you're not rushing to start him, but there should not be a wide receiver on the waivers with back-to-back double-digit target games, in my opinion.
Yeah, in a league where you're in it, I guarantee you that would never happen.
Yeah, unfortunately it was already taken, but in our main league. But yeah, T.J. Hawkinson, as Blake mentioned, monitor his injury status with his hand. He did not practice on Wednesday. So yeah, he could take away targets from St. Brown. He could also be a valuable tight end play if you need him to be, because that's probably what you drafted him as. But not a great matchup. Arizona defense ranks 5th in total yardage allowed per game and 4th in NFL points against, and I do think that I think the Cardinals are going to dominate this game after losing a close one to the Rams.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
So we can move on to another matchup we used to say would be a garbage matchup between Jets and Dolphins, but the Dolphins are kind of sneakily getting on a win streak, it seems. But yeah, we'll talk about the Jets. We'll keep it short because there's not a whole lot to talk about here. Is anyone worth rostering besides Michael Carter and Elijah Moore, who are both on IR, and Michael Carter could come back this week? But outside of those two, is there anyone really worth rostering?
Yeah, not really. Jamison Crowder has had moments, but nothing you can reliably count on. And even like Ty Johnson or Tevin Coleman, like those guys aren't really like anything special. So yeah, I think especially given the matchup, I think you fade all Jets offensive players. I don't think you're starting the Jets defense by any chance. So yeah, I think it's just no Jets on the roster this week.
What about Carter if he's activated and expected to be on a full workload?
I would still be hesitant because of the matchup. The Dolphins have been really hot as of late on defense, and it is the Jets at the end of the day. They don't usually score a lot of points.
Yeah, and we also saw Carter have most of his success without Zach Wilson. So, yeah, we make fun of Zach Wilson every single podcast.
I think the team saw most of their success without Zach Wilson.
That is true. I personally picked up Jamison Crowder last week. I'm keeping him on my team just because our waivers are so shallow. You can hope that maybe he has a good week, but I'm not starting him. I'm not starting him. Dolphins, though, they were on bye last week. Myles Gaskin was placed on the COVID-19 list last Friday. He is vaccinated, though, so he could play. Gaskin
every Dolphins running back is on the COVID list. You know about that, right?
Yes, I did see that.
Okay, yeah. So it's not just it's not just Philip Lindsay. It's not just Gaskin. It's not just I'm forgetting. Oh, Salvon Ahmed.
Ahmed, yeah.
Yeah, Salvin. Yeah.
Salvin.
Simon Theodore Salvin. So yeah, but Yeah, that is something to monitor because presumably you like the matchup, but it's about who's available, who's healthy. Um, I don't know. I don't know who else is in the mix that could be potentially starting this week. So that's something to monitor.
Yeah, just in general, the entire NFL, a few teams specifically are really struggling with people getting and testing positive for COVID. So just always be on alert on what's going to happen for those teams and your players. It's been spiking recently, so keep an eye on that because that could change any day.
'Tis the season.
Yeah. It is a good matchup, as you said, but I guess you just have to wait out and see if he's actually going to play. Gaskin's been consistently inconsistent, as we've always talked about, but you got to like the matchup. Jalen Waddle, though, 6 games with double-digit targets this season, double-digit fantasy points in 5 straight games, and he even scored 18 fantasy points in Devontae Parker's first game back from injury, and that was kind of a concern with him earlier in the season, not being able to do amazing with Parker being there, but Jalen Waddle has emerged and been arguably the best outside of Jamar Chase, arguably the best rookie wide receiver, it seems.
Yeah, season long, I would give the edge to Waddle. I think.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's been more consistent
just because he's had fewer slumps than Chase.
Yeah, and we'll talk about him later. But Devontae Parker, definitely worth rostering, averaging 8 targets and 5 receptions on the season. Yeah, if he's on your waivers, go pick him up. He's certainly worth rostering, and I'm sure we'll talk about him in the DFS podcast because, once again, he's priced pretty low, and I feel pretty good about him.
Way too low.
Way too low. Mike Gesicki, he had 11 targets in Week 13. But do you think his production is going to take a hit as Parker gets reintegrated in this offense?
Possibly, but I will say Gesicki is kind of different from most tight ends in the league. They really use him more like a oversized wide receiver.
Yeah.
That can block pretty well. So I still like Gesicki. I think that honestly they can all be viable, especially with Gesicki being a tight end. I think he kind of, his expectations are kind of lowered just by default because of how shallow that position is. And in the offseason, we'll talk more about why you probably shouldn't play with tight ends or at least be required to use tight ends, but more on that later. With him in this offense right now, with Parker kind of getting back reintegrated, I think you should kind of lower expectations from what you were seeing from him in Parker's absence, but I don't think it'll be as dramatic of a plummet like Dalton Schultz, for instance.
Yeah, I was about to bring him up if you didn't. That is a good comparison. But yeah, I don't expect that to happen for him. And like we said, great matchup. Jets defense ranked second to last in total yards allowed per game and last in NFL points allowed per game. We can move on to Bengals versus my Broncos. So Joe Burrow, 25 for 34, 348, 2 touchdowns, good for 22.22 fantasy points against a tough loss to the 49ers in overtime last week, but he looked good out there. Joe Mixon, though, 18 carries for 58 yards and 2 receptions for 10 yards, only 8.8 fantasy points.
That's like a Saquon Barkley stat line.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, Mixon has had only 3 single-digit fantasy scoring games this season. I know he's missed a few games because of injury, but not a ton. But 2 of those 3 have been in the past 2 weeks. So, what's up with Mixon? What do you think's going on?
I think it's a combination of matchups and just being a little bit banged up. It's a longer season. Not that we're at the end of the regular season yet, but I think it's a long season. It's a tough stretch of games that they've been on. I'm trying to pull up their recent games. So let's see here. San Francisco, that's a tough matchup. The Chargers, they were just behind. They got behind so early in that game that they really couldn't reliably lean on him as much, and he got banged up in that game. That was the game that he left with a neck injury. So it's a combination of those things. I don't think you're panicking on him just because of how strong he was performing prior to that Week 13 game.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the explanation for it. And we can talk about the pass catchers more, but I think that I think he can bounce back. Although the Broncos defense is a difficult matchup.
I do agree. I think you have to stay trusting Mixon. I think you just have to. But yeah, we can talk about the pass catchers. Jamar Chase, 5 receptions for 77 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, and 1 rush for 6 yards. 25.3 fantasy points. I mean, do you just feel like Chase is back? I mean, you weren't really benching him, so it's just good to see him boom again.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see it more than just one time since the stretch of struggling games. But the thing that's positive about it is that he is getting the looks. He's getting red zone looks. He's delivering on those plays. I think he even had 1 touchdown called back.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so Burrow likes him, clearly. They were former teammates, and now, like, back in college, and they're teammates again here. So I think that they have a very good relationship. I think that he's probably one of Burrow's favorite targets. Certainly not Tyler Boyd, but yeah, I think hold your horses on Izzy back completely. Let's see him do it. If he could do it against the Broncos, I would say yes.
Yeah, I agree. T. Higgins, 5 receptions for 114 yards. Yeah, I feel like he is going to be someone that's kind of looked over for drafts next season, be underrated. You asked me about Renfro's ADP. I'm not saying Higgins is Renfro, certainly not. But, I mean, where do you think he's going to be drafted next year, or where do you think he should be, rather?
I think he gets drafted inside the top 25-ish.
Yeah.
At the position.
Yeah.
Like inside wide receiver 25, because I mean, we've seen it over the past few games. He's been producing at wide receiver 1 numbers. So T. Higgins is a very valuable asset in this offense, and I think that he's going to improve. I mean, he's still a young player. Is this like his? I don't want to be completely wrong on that. Yeah, I was thinking 2nd or 3rd season. So, yeah, I mean, I like what I've been seeing from Higgins over this past month.
I agree. I think if in drafts you go running back heavy, and like we said, probably in the summer we'll talk about some draft strategies. But if you go running back heavy, I'd love Higgins to probably be my wide receiver 3 if he keeps up this streak through the end of the season. But tough matchup this week against Denver. They rank 7th in total yards allowed per game and 2nd in NFL points allowed per game. And speaking of the Broncos, Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon both had 20-plus fantasy points. I'll read their stats because it's really good. 15 rushes and 73 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown for Javonte Williams, and he also had a 10-yard receiving touchdown. And then Melvin Gordon, 24 rushes for 111 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Maybe this is not that I think I'm a huge fan, but is this a little bit too much of fandom coming out of me? Do you think this is the best running back duo in the league?
I think you should maybe remember who they played last week.
No, they played the Patriots, right? Definitely not the Lions.
They played the Lions. So we've seen a lot of teams bully the Lions with their running backs. I will concede that the Broncos have a very talented young rookie in Javonte Williams, and a very, Melvin Gordon, just a few seasons ago, he was an absolute stud on the Chargers. So yeah. There's no denying that, these are 2 talented running backs. I think there's debate around the best running back duo in the league, but you're happy with your roster currently, and that's all that really matters.
Yeah, and just a transition off of that, they have a lot of decent pass catchers, but fantasy-wise, can you trust any of them?
A lot of decent pass catchers on the salary, yeah. Can you trust any of them? Not really.
I dropped Cortland Sutton for Kendrick Bourne last night.
Yeah, and I don't blame you. We talked about if Sutton couldn't get more than, you said 10 fantasy points, and he did not get that.
No, I think he had 2 receptions for 9 yards, something like that.
Yeah, something not good, something not worth rostering. So,
no.
I think that not every game is going to be a running clinic by Denver. So there will be games where I think Jerry Jeudy gets more involved. This very well may be one of them. The Bengals are certainly a high-powered offense. But it comes down to if Denver's defense is going to carry, like they have a few times throughout the season.
Yeah, and throughout their recent history as well. And like you said, I mean, this defense also matches up to where they might need to pass more. I mean, they rank 29th in passing yards allowed per game, so very low, but 4th in rushing yards allowed per game, so very high. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
That really surprises me that they're that low in passing yards allowed. But
that is surprising. But we can move on to Falcons 49ers.
Let's do it.
Yeah, Cordell Patterson, 16 rushes for 58 yards and a touchdown, 2 receptions for 1 yard. Patterson has had 6 games this season with 5 or more receptions, but he's had fewer than 5 receptions in his past 4 games, so the way they're using him has kind of changed throughout the season. But Mike Davis, someone that we were saying you must drop in, he's probably been dropped in a lot of leagues, probably on the waivers, not saying go after him necessarily, but he's quietly had back-to-back double-digit fantasy scoring games with 9 receptions in those past 2 games. So I'll ask you, are you worried about the way they're using Patterson and for his volume for fantasy purposes?
No, not really. I think that this Falcons offense is just kind of a mess all around.
Yeah.
Earlier in the season, you were thrilled with how Patterson was performing. I think that he's kind of coming back down to earth a little bit, and you know we talked about expecting that at some point in the season that he wasn't going to be able to sustain the amount of volume and fantasy volume that he's been getting earlier in the season. In terms of Mike Davis, he's rostered in about 51% of leagues. So someone to consider, I suppose, if he is available in your league. But what it really comes down to is like Mike Davis doesn't have a lot of value, in my opinion, without scoring touchdowns, and he's not really put very often in a position to score touchdowns. So
I agree.
I still kind of feel the same way about Mike Davis as we did earlier in the year. The question was about Patterson's volume. I think that it's just this offense. It's kind of a mess.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, the reason, if you asked me before the season started if we'd be talking about Patterson like this at all, I'd be like, Patterson? What do you mean, Patterson? Yeah. So, they definitely have been using their offensive weapons in unconventional ways. Russell Gage, 4 receptions for 64 yards. Kyle Pitts, 5 receptions for 61 yards. So, here's an interesting statistic. Since Ridley's absence, so I think that's since week 8, Gage has averaged roughly 10.5 fantasy points, whereas Pitts has averaged roughly 7.5 fantasy points. And that includes 2 0-reception games for Gage, and he's still averaging 3 more points than Pitts is in that stretch of time. So I guess I'll ask, because we've talked about Pitts a lot before, like I don't know why he's not getting more looks in Ridley's absence, but I mean the tight ends are consistently starting over Pitts. I guess just add on to this list if you got anyone else. Kittle, Mark Andrews, Kelsey, Gronk. Who else you think is a lock over Pitts?
A lock. I mean, that's kind of a difficult question because you've already named all of the really, truly valuable tight ends in the league.
Yeah, and that shows you how shallow it is once again. There's not a lock probably after those 4.
No, yeah, I would argue that after that it gets kind of chalky. Like, you kind of got to play matchups and things. But Kyle Pitts, from where he was drafted and like in real NFL and in addition to fantasy leagues, like he should be doing a lot more than he has been. And it comes down to just this offense. Like, it's not good, and they're really missing Ridley's absence.
Yes, they are, for sure. And this 49ers defense is strong pass defense. They rank 6th in passing yards allowed per game and 8th in total yards allowed per game. So, you don't feel like this is an amazing matchup for your Falcons players. But we can move on to the 49ers. Elijah Mitchell, who was injured last week, did not practice on Wednesday. He's dealing with a concussion and a knee injury. I assume I don't know. It could have been both of them that held him out. I don't know the severity of those two in comparison with each other, but he's dealing with 2 things, so that's not great. Keep an eye on him, though, because he's been a very reliable option. Debo, though, 1 receptions for 22 yards, and 8 rushes for 37 yards and a touchdown. 12.9 fantasy points. He's one of the strangest players in the NFL with how his team chooses to use him. But, I mean, it's because Elijah Mitchell was out.
Yeah, it's really only because their running back situation is so unclear. But, yeah, Debo, I mean, really what this does is it lowers his value because, I mean, like you said, 1 catch for 22 yards is not good in PPR formats. So,
No.
like, regardless of the rushing upside, which, I mean, there really isn't that much. He's getting single-digit carries. This is bad. This is bad for people who manage Deebo Samuel if the 49ers continue to use him in this way. So I think you're going to have to lower expectations for him as long as Mitchell remains hurt and the running back position is unfilled by one player.
It's just so funny. I mean, someone who emerged as a fantasy wide receiver 1 tier, and we're talking about rushing upside. It's so funny. But it's because their pass catchers are showing up finally. Their other pass catchers, Brandon Ayuk, 6 receptions for 62 yards and a touchdown. And then George Kittle, 13 receptions for 151 receiving yards and a touchdown, 34.1 fantasy points. I read that, I think this is true. I read this, I don't know when it was tweeted on Sunday, but Kittle is leading the league in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns in the past 2 games. It's 300 plus and 3 receiving touchdowns. He's emerged as the best tight end I'd say you play this week and probably the rest of the season, barring any injury setbacks. And he is dealing with a knee injury. Did not practice today, so keep an eye on that. But
he's certainly performing very strongly. I think we're forgetting what Travis Kelce is capable of a little bit. But I get it. I mean, recency bias is strong right now. We were talking about how George Kittle was not the player you drafted earlier on the season, and now he's beginning to look more like himself. So it could go either way, but regardless, you're happy if you have Kittle right now.
Yeah, for sure. And with how Kittle's been playing, I'll ask you: is there enough to go around on a consistent basis for, I guess, Ayuk and Debo?
That is game script dependent, because we know that the main focus of the 49ers offense is running the ball. We've talked about how they've had games with 40 plus rushing attempts. So in games like that, it's going to be very limited. There's not going to be hardly enough to go around for one pass catcher, let alone all 3 of these guys. But that's what it comes down to in this matchup against the Falcons. It depends on if Mitchell's available. If he's not, you could certainly see a little bit more passing usage, but I think they're going to be able to run on Atlanta regardless of who's there.
I agree. I mean, the Falcons defense ranks 25th in total yards allowed per game and 28th in NFL points allowed per game. So, and this is a running offense, so I think they could do pretty much anything they want against them and probably get away with it. Yeah, so we can move on to divisional matchup, Seahawks versus Rams. Russell Wilson had a good game, 17 for 28, 260 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. But here's the main thing we really need to talk about. Rashad Penny. I mean, who would have thought? 16 rushes for 137 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Good for 26.8 fantasy points. Whereas Alex Collins had 7 rushes for 16 yards. Extremely inefficient. I heard this week that, Penny's been riddled with injuries his entire NFL career. But I heard that he was drafted before Nick Chubb in the NFL draft. Yeah, so obviously he has the potential and he has all the skills necessary to succeed. It's just been injuries plaguing his career so far. So, I think he was probably picked up in a lot of leagues off the waivers, but you do need to keep in mind this was against the Texans last week. I think they were going that matchup last in rushing yards allowed per game. But how do you feel about Penny rest of season? How do you think? What's his outlook?
It's tricky because of how Russell Wilson has been playing lately. So obviously, you like how he played for the most part against the Texans, but like you said, it was the Texans. I'm gonna pull up their rest of season schedule, and kind of just break down game by game. So, at the Rams, we saw what James Conner did. I'm not arguing that Penny is as good as James Conner in this offense, but I think that could be a difficult matchup. You like Detroit in Week 17, and then Chicago in Week 16. That's kind of middle of the road, I would say. So, what it really comes down to, and it kind of goes back to our last matchup preview, but just game script. If Russell Wilson is struggling, it's very unlikely that they're going to be relying on a run-heavy approach. So, if Wilson can get right and stay consistent, then Penny has an opportunity to kind of fill in a very valuable role, someone that we usually see from Chris Carson. So I think that there's opportunity for him and some good matchups in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't see a unrostered running back boom too much, so we definitely need to add him if he hasn't already been added off your waivers. But yeah, I guess we can move on. DK Metcalf, 4 receptions, 43 yards. He's not proving himself in Russell Wilson's return. And it's crazy. We talk about this. It's tough because it's the big name player. You have to focus on the stats, not the name. But you might have to bench DK Metcalf in your fantasy playoffs.
I would argue you do.
Yeah.
Metcalf has been a single-digit scorer in 4 of the last 5. He had 11 points against San Francisco in Week 13. So, I mean, he hasn't scored a touchdown since Jacksonville in Week 8 before their bye.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not good. I'm just kind of coming up with these stats on the fly, but I mean the thing that you like is he has had 8 targets in 4 of those last 5 games, but he's not doing anything with them. Yardage totals 26, 31, 13, 60 at San Francisco, and then 43 at Houston. We talked about if these guys couldn't get it done against Houston, that you really need to consider pivoting off of them. And Tyler Lockett had a great game. He had 5 catches for 142 yards and a touchdown. He's been an absolute stud over these past few games. Metcalf has been a bum, and I mean, you can't just look at the name and be like, but it's DK Metcalf. At some point, this guy's not producing. You got to let him prove himself before you cast him out there just based on name.
Yeah, I agree. It's also very interesting. Lockett almost had 20 more fantasy points with 1 more catch.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. I mean, Russell Wilson
100 more yards with 1 more catch. How about that?
Russell Wilson, I mean, last season when Metcalf was doing amazing and was a wide receiver 1, he was having stat lines like that, like Lockett, and then Lockett was also having games like that. But Russell Wilson is not being efficient enough and just having a ton of passing yards to be able to support both of them. They're not the type of players that get a bunch of receptions. They're really boom guys, and Russell Wilson has been able to support them both, but he can't anymore. And it's Metcalf that's taking is getting the short end of the stick on that scenario.
I would argue it's not that Russell Wilson can't anymore, it's that he hasn't.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Not saying that's definitive, but hasn't. I agree. And then it's not a great matchup. The Rams are looking to continue their momentum and potentially win the division. And they're just a really strong defense as well. And they beat the Cardinals without Jalen Ramsey last week, I believe. So, yeah, not a great matchup. But we can move on to the Rams. Matthew Stafford had a great day, 23 for 30, 287 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And the Seahawks defense ranks last in passing yards allowed per game. I think he's a really good play this week, and I think he's going to continue the momentum. Darrell Henderson was out with COVID. A lot of these Rams players, this Rams team is having a lot of issues with COVID. Sony Michel, 20 rushes for 7.9 fantasy points. I don't know if you really want to get into this. He was the last player on Blake's lineup that didn't get him the win.
I have, over the past couple days since Monday night, I've had time to reflect on my season, and it just wasn't my year. I started off hot, and then players started dropping off my team, due to injury or otherwise. So it just wasn't my year, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I mean, it would have been nice. It would have been nice for Michel to get one catch on one of Matthew Stafford's 23 completions, but hey, I mean,
Yeah.
just wasn't meant to be.
Nope, I guess not. Cooper Kupp, though, 30-plus points, yet again. Fantasy MVP, it seems. Could have been Derrick Henry's, but he got injured, but I think it's clearly Kupp now for this season. Odell Beckham Jr., though, 6 receptions for 77 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, I would argue, just quickly, since I had Henry,
Yes.
I would argue that Kupp would still be fantasy MVP regardless of Henry if he had stayed, just based on where you drafted him.
Yo, certainly. Yes.
I mean,
If
he
you're
is on
factoring
pace. He's on pace to have the best single season by a wide receiver since Jerry Rice back in 1995.
Jeez. Yeah.
And just mentioning Jerry Rice in the company of Cooper Kupp is absurd.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's something that even if you factor out the extra game in the NFL season now, Cooper Kupp is on pace to do some incredible record-breaking things this year.
He certainly is, and if you're factoring in where you drafted him, I mean, certainly he's fantasy MVP. I mean, I drafted Woods before Kupp was drafted, and I'm sure most leagues did that too. So that's tough to see. But yeah, Odell Beckham seems to be getting back on track. He did test positive for COVID on Tuesday, so monitor that situation. Van Jefferson, 2 receptions for 58 yards and a touchdown. A Matthew Stafford bomb was his touchdown, and that was great to see. Funnily enough, his dad is the wide receiver coach for the Cardinals, so he got to witness that play.
Yeah, I saw that.
That was interesting. I mean, you don't like Van Jefferson only having 3 targets in this game, but he had, I think, 9 in both weeks 13 and 14, so it's hard to bench a wide receiver.
You mean 12 and 13, maybe?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
13, 14. No, yes, you're right. Yes, sorry. 12, 13. It's hard to bench, in my opinion. It's very hard to bench a Rams wide receiver in this, just with how they have been playing recently. And I do expect his targets to go back up more.
Also important to note, Tyler Higbee was a false positive, so he's good to go this week. And then, yeah, if Odell Beckham misses, I kind of expect Van Jefferson's receiving numbers to go up from last week, just because we've seen how they've kind of integrated Beckham into the offense. He's sliding into that number 2 role in a more convincing manner. Yeah. But again, if Beckham's unavailable, I think Jefferson goes back to that number 2 role, and you feel pretty good about him in this matchup, especially.
Yeah, I agree. Especially since, Seahawks rank last in total yards allowed per game and 5th. But 5th in NFL points allowed per game. That's really interesting. But I think
the Rams take the over on that 20.2.
I do agree. We can move on to Packers-Ravens, which should be an interesting matchup. Aaron Rodgers had a phenomenal day. 29 for 37, 341 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Just a phenomenal day. But let's talk about Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones had 5 rushes for 35 yards and a touchdown and 3 receptions for 30 yards and a touchdown, whereas A.J. Dillon had 15 rushes, 10 more than Jones, 71 rushing yards, and 0 receptions. What do you make of this backfield?
I think the thing to take away from this is that if Jones doesn't get those touchdowns, he has a night of 9.5 fantasy points. So if that's the case, then you feel like these are kind of the same upside of players, but Dillon got more touches.
Yeah.
So honestly,
Jones had half the touches that Dillon had, but obviously in PPR, receptions are valuable touches.
Yeah, and Jones got 2 touchdowns. But what I'm saying is A.J. Dillon is getting the majority of the touches. You have to hope that Jones finds his way into the end zone at least once to make his day viable. So, man, it's a tough position if you roster Aaron Jones. I mean, you're really crossing your fingers and stroking your lucky rabbit's foot, so you can't feel good about it.
Yeah, especially when you drafted him. No, you can't feel great about it at all. It's misleading for sure. His fantasy point total last week. Devontae Adams, 34.1 fantasy points. Gotta love that. Allen Lazard, though, 6 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. So I'll ask you, is he worthy of a waiver acquisition, or is he just a product of a great Aaron Rodgers day?
I think it's a little of both. Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a limited participant in practice with a back injury. We've seen Allen Lazard have these moments of good games.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're not doubting Devontae Adams with Aaron Rodgers there. I think if MVS misses, Lazard is kind of a interesting consideration for this week.
Yeah.
I mean, the matchup isn't great. Just with how Baltimore played Cleveland last week, but season long, I know it's a good matchup. Baltimore ranks 31st in passing yards allowed. That being said, it's a risky move in the playoffs. So I think you can pick him up and see if he produces again, but I wouldn't necessarily start him.
I agree. As Blake said, they do rank 31st in passing yards allowed per game, but I mean, this is the Ravens defense. I don't expect just the Packers to be able to throw over them with no concern at all. But the Ravens defense ranks first in rushing yards allowed per game, which could make the Aaron Jones play even more complicated. Let's just say that.
Yeah, if anything, I think it allows for Aaron Jones to get more involved in the passing game, which we've seen him do. And maybe I wouldn't at all be surprised to see A.J. Dillon out-carry Jones, but for Jones to make up the difference through receptions. I think that's a likely outcome for this matchup. Yeah,
I mean, I'm always complaining about the Cowboys' backfield, but this might be an even worse one, the Packers' backfield.
Yeah, this one is definitely up there.
Yeah, all right, we can move on to the Ravens. Lamar Jackson got injured on Sunday with an ankle injury, and he did not practice on Wednesday, so monitor him. Although Tyler Huntley led an inspiring almost comeback. They got close, but they still lost to the Browns last week. Devonta Freeman, 13 carries for 64 yards and 5 receptions for 8 yards. Marquise Brown, 5 receptions for 41 yards. And then this is really what I want to talk about right now, at least. Rashad Bateman, 7 receptions for 103 receiving yards, and he almost scored a receiving touchdown. He was stopped at the 1. But what do you do? I mean, in week 13, he had 1 target and 0 receptions. What do you do with Bateman?
Yeah, that was a game where Huntley started, so we should mention that. Yeah. But I think he's kind of a low-end flex, honestly. Bateman has had moments of consistency earlier in the season, especially after their bye week. But, ultimately it does come down to Jackson's availability. And, we've seen Marquise Brown struggle over the past few games.
Yeah.
So you can't feel better about Bateman than Brown.
No.
So I think he's a low end flex. I think he's a risky flex.
Yeah, and then we'll wrap up the Ravens with Mark Andrews, 11 receptions for 115 yards and a touchdown. He's now the number 1 position ranked tight end. So I'll ask you, we've talked about this a bit with Kelsey, but are the days of Kelsey being the undisputed tight end one over, or am I overreacting?
I think you're overreacting. Kelsey,
I still do not like the strategy. Okay, it's different in leagues that have tight ends, but I do not like the strategy of taking Kelsey at the turn of round 1, especially if you're not being required to start tight ends.
I agree with that. But for a standard league that requires tight ends, I think Kelsey is a viable first-round pick, especially in the later half of that. After you get past the first few workhorse running backs. I'll say this. Kelsey is not playing up to his standard this season, and I think that has a lot to do with Mahomes' struggles.
Yeah.
I would guess. So Mark Andrews has 4 single-digit games. How many do you think Kelsey has? While I look it up. He just had one last week, so there's 1
probably
for free.
About the same. I don't know.
Kelce has 1, 2, 3, 4, the same number of single-digit games. So, I mean, if you take away or if you even cut in half Mark Andrews' 40-point game, I think that Kelce still has the edge. So, I mean, I think Kelce's still the guy. I like his quarterback better from a passing perspective. I'm not panicking on Kelce. He's just, he's still the tight end 2 right now.
Yeah,
I think there's still plenty of time for him to take back position rank 1 also.
Yeah. All right, and the Packers, defensively, they're top 10 in every metric, so they're a strong defense. So you don't feel amazing about any of these Ravens players necessarily.
Yeah, I think the Packers are kind of a sneaky team to make a push in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they currently are, just based off like tie-breaking rules. They are the NFC 1 seed currently. So
yeah, I mean they broke the Cardinals' undefeated streak earlier this year. I feel like they don't get enough coverage, but maybe that's just my limited view on things. But
yeah, that's true. Move on to the primetime matchup: Saints Buccaneers. Taysom Hill, 15 for 21, 175 passing yards. Whoa. But what he got it done on the ground. 11 carries for 73 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. One of them was a big rush at the end of the game. 26.3 fantasy points. And that was against the Jets. So are you still optimistic?
It's a little concerning that he was unable to get over 200 passing yards. Against the Jets, I mean, that's a little concerning, but at the end of the day, his usage with his legs is so high that he's always going to have a solid floor, fantasy-wise. I'm not betting against him with the Buccaneers. I want to see him. I mean, I don't want to see him, but I'm not going to doubt him until I see him have like a 12 or 10 point fantasy day. Because I think the way that he uses, the way that he rushes and still has the upside of a quarterback, it's really hard for him to have a bad fantasy day.
Yeah, I agree. The only other player we'll talk about specifically, Alvin Kamara, 27 carries for 120 rushing yards and a touchdown, and 4 receptions for 25 yards. I mean, he had a dominant performance in his first week back off of injury. I mean, we used to always say, Kamara has been a running back 1 in fantasy purposes for quite some time, but he's showing that he's not just a receiving back. He's not just a PPR beast. 27 carries for 120 rushing yards is amazing for a running back, and that he still has that receiving prowess. So you feel great about Kamara. And then Mark Ingram did not practice on Wednesday. Not that you're really worried about him taken away from Kamara, but that's something to note. But not
I think the thing that matters is, given the matchup, you feel better about having a player like Alvin Kamara because of his receiving upside.
Yeah, exactly, because the Buccaneers are easier to pass against, 24th in that metric, but 3rd in rushing yards allowed per game. So Kamara's just going to get it done either way, and that's how I feel about him. So very strong, elite RB1. We can move on to the Buccaneers. Tom Brady, 31 for 46, 363 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and even a 15-yard rush, and he had a QB sneak on the goal line.
Yeah, baby.
He had 30.12 fantasy points. You got anything else to add on your boy?
Not a lot. Brady was looking 20 years younger on that run, and it was great to see.
Yep. He's always ran like he was 44. I think that's more of the the comparison. Leonard Fournette had an amazing day though. 19 carries for 113 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown, while also having 4 receptions for 19 yards. One of those was a 50-yard rushing touchdown, but you gotta love the way he's getting involved on in every aspect of the offense. He did not practice on Wednesday, so monitor that situation. It'll be interesting to see the confidence level in Ronald Jones if Fournette is to be out, but hopefully Fournette is not out.
Especially it's a tough matchup for running backs. So you kind of hope that Fournette's available for his passing upside if you roster him.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints' defense is pretty middle of the road for every metric except for rushing yardage allowed per game, where they rank 6th, less than 100 rushing yards per game. So they're a strong rush defense. But Mike Evans, 21.1 fantasy points. Chris Godwin, 20.5 fantasy points. Gronk didn't have an amazing day, didn't find the end zone, but still got you double digits. I mean, you feel pretty good rolling out all three of those guys every week.
It was a good week for fantasy. It was a good week for DFS, where I had a Brady and Evans Godwin double stack, and that paid off for me. So yeah, I mean, you love the Bucks. They haven't performed the best historically against the Saints with Tom Brady there. So I'll ask you: do you think they break that streak and the Bucks take this one at home?
Yeah, I feel good about the Buccaneers.
I think so too. I think it's really the limited upside of the Saints' offense outside of Hill and Kamara that doesn't really scare you.
I don't think they can keep up with the Buccaneers. I wouldn't be surprised if Hill and Kamara both have pretty good days, especially Kamara, just due to the lack of options. But that's kind of the problem as far as an NFL matchup is concerned.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Yeah, we can move on to the last matchup. Monday Night Football, Vikings-Bears, divisional matchup. Talked about Kirk Cousins a bit in the news episode. He only had 14 fantasy points. He was 14th for 31, 216 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I expect him to bounce back a bit. I mean, the Chicago defense ranks 8th in passing yards allowed per game, so not a particularly great matchup, but Kirk Cousins has been really good this season. I mean, I think he had 4 interceptions before this game, so he'd been doing very well.
Yeah, his touchdown to turnover ratio was really good. I agree with you. I think he does have a better game, and I think it's going to be a bit more of a competitive game than... I mean, that game against the Steelers did end up being kind of competitive, but not really. Like the score was kind of misleading.
Yeah.
Because it was a blowout early.
Yeah.
So I feel good about Cousins bouncing back, probably getting a 18 to 18 plus fantasy day, I would say.
Yeah, and Dalvin Cook, amazing day. 35.2 fantasy points, 205 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he allowed Kirk Cousins to not have an amazing day and the team still to win. He was just doing everything. And I like having him. My matchup in fantasy this week in the playoffs, they don't have anyone on Monday, so I like Cook being my last guy. If I need him, I think he can pull through for me, especially since the Bears ranked 24th in rushing yards allowed per game, and he's coming off of that game, so I feel good about that. Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, no, that's like the second time that Dalvin Cook's worn that shoulder harness or whatever, little device they had him. Should he just always wear that? Because he seems to always go off when he wears it.
I guess so. Whatever works. I mean, it's fine by me.
He feels secure. He feels cradled. He plays so well. And it was great to see off such a short turnaround off that injury.
I know.
For him to perform the way he did. So
when we did the matchup previews for Week 14, we literally said Dalvin Cook probably isn't playing, and then look at him.
Yeah.
So that was a quick turnaround. But he's got a long rest from last Thursday to this Monday, so that's good. Justin Jefferson, 20.5 fantasy points, proving again that he's a very solid elite wide receiver 1. Adam Thielen, monitor his injury status. He didn't play last Thursday due to his ankle injury. KJ Osborne, in Thielen's absence, had 3 receptions for 83 yards and a touchdown. How do you feel about Osborne if Thielen is back? Because I think if Thielen's out, he's another decent option.
Sort of. So last week he did have 9 targets, which you like. I mean, I think that comes from Thielen's absence, kind of picking up the slack. The 3 catches is a bit concerning, and the touchdown came on a 62-yard reception. So
yeah, it helped.
His day's a lot. Yeah, his stat line's a lot different without that one play, and that kind of concerns you a little bit. If Thielen misses, you may have better options, but if you started him last week, you likely don't. And with that being said, I think you can confidently start him again if Thielen misses. If Thielen's back, I would avoid starting him.
I agree with that. We can move on to the Bears. I mean, who really only have David Montgomery as a consistent fantasy option. 10 carries for 42 yards, but 6 receptions for 39 really helped him get it done for PPR. He led the team in receptions and targets, So that's definitely interesting. Darnell Mooney, 2.9 points on 1 reception. Allen Robinson, 3.4 points on 2 receptions. I mean, this is just more proof that Montgomery is the only consistent fantasy starter on this offense. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think you buried the lead a little bit with Justin Fields had a pretty solid day against at Green Bay. I mean, 224 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have 3 turnovers, but that kind of makes you feel good. I mean, the Vikings defense is it's bad. So honestly, like if you're desperate, I think you could get away with starting Justin Fields.
Yeah, I mean, I dropped Cam Newton for Fields. I'm not playing him over Kyler, obviously, but Fields does have a good schedule for the rest of the season. I think it's Vikings, then
Seahawks,
Giants, Seahawks, and then Vikings
it's Minnesota
again.
Twice. Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So he's a sneaky ad.
Yeah. Let's see. His roster percentage is 18.1%. So if you are in a deeper league, if you are having difficulties, so maybe that would have been someone I could have mentioned in the conversation. Like, would you like him over Dak Prescott this week?
Oh, God.
I kind of just popped that up on you.
Yeah. I would say no. I think his day was aided a lot by 1 or 2. I don't know. One of them might have been a carry, so that didn't add to his totals. But one of them was a short pass that ended up being a huge receiving touchdown from just a little speedster. So, I mean, that helps his stats a lot.
Jakeem Grant.
Yeah, and then there was another one, and I don't know if it was a pass or if it counted as a rush, but they had 2 touchdowns like that. It was interesting. So,
yeah,
no, I couldn't bring myself to do it over Dak, just because we've seen Justin Fields struggle passing. It's a good matchup. I think he's worth rostering. See if he can do it again this week, and then maybe he could be a viable starter going forward over guys that are underperforming.
Yeah. Like you said, a very favorable fantasy playoffs match, rest of season schedule. So something to consider. All right, we have reached the end of our matchup previews. Thank you guys so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. We will be back on Saturday for news and various updates, as well as DFS preview. So we will speak with you guys again then. Thank you and goodbye.
Peace out.